Session five's rewrite, we get to do whatever we want, essentially. So you could pick something modern that you just want to reshape and change and alter. Or in this case, I am picking something a bit older. I actually haven't looked at the date. Okay, so the third edition was in 1848. The original, let's see, I'm not seeing a date for the original copy. Maybe 1847? So I'm going back in time for one, and I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but I was like, ooh, I get to pick a favorite. So I'm going to pick Jane Eyre, which is one of my favorite books, and something I've read quite a bit. A fair number of times. So the ideas remain the same. We are looking at it and we're saying, what is it about this story? Like, what do we want to keep, to preserve? And what do we want to alter? So even a super modern one, like obviously in this case, I'm looking at sort of verbiage and tone and approach because it is from the 1800s. But even a modern one, we're saying, what could make it, like maybe I don't have to change the wording as much, but I am going to want to make it my own, or I'm going to want to make it how I see it or how I think it should be done. So those same questions are going to stay. Even if it's just a book that was literally written like last year, there could still be some other way to do it. And to me, one of the glories of a rewrite is knowledge. We're not looking at it and saying, oh, that's the worst book ever, I've got to fix it. We're saying they made a lot of decisions, the same way we make a lot of decisions when we write. And it gives us a chance to say, well, what kind of decision do I want to make with it? And therefore, that could give me some insight into the decisions that other person made. So this is one of my favorite openings for a story. So let's look at this short first paragraph. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning. But since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. Now that, I don't know if that's really, like, we could go into the questions, couldn't we, about what kind of opening that is. And I think that brings forward a lot of questions that happen because of what we read with all of the authors so far, who are all English. We've read Charles Dickens, we've looked at C.S. Lewis, and we've looked at Mary Shelley. All of them are English. All of them are influenced by where they are. And I myself have lived in England for a number of years, and when I read this opening, compared to when I read it when I was quite young and I hadn't spent any time in England, when I read it then, it didn't really resonate. I would find myself sort of skipping down to here, like where Jane is starting to read and different things. I'm sort of going down into what's happening. But now that I have had that experience in my past of having lived in England, this opening is wonderful. It is clear. It is important. It is everything English. That leads me to say, if my audience is like my younger self, they don't know about all things English. So, what could I replace this with? What should I be doing in that space? If this is a very English opening and I want you to feel the environment that I'm in, what would I need to change that to? So I'm going to think about where I was born, in Austin, Texas, and it is hot. So more people have probably had the experience of being in a hot climate, especially in the United States, than in a super cold one. Obviously, in the northern U.S., there are plenty of people who've experienced these cold, rainy sort of days. But that's not typical of where I was born and raised. And so I didn't understand this at all. But what she's doing, what Brontë is doing here, is setting up this understanding of English weather and of English possibilities. There is no escape for Jane. You can't even go outside because it is windy and cold. And when we say windy and cold, we mean painfully windy and cold. I was talking with a friend the other day who said, yes, he was out, he's in the Canary Islands getting some sun because you have to warm your bones. It sounds very silly to me from the Austin perspective because I was always hot, pretty much always. There would maybe be a couple weeks of chilly weather. But now that I've been in that environment, I know that it hurts your insides after a while and you have to get warm. So what if it's the opposite? What if I put her in my space? And my space is hot. No one was going outside today. We tried earlier before the sun hit its height. So noon, so I'm making it sort of fancy there. Maybe I shouldn't make it fancy. We tried earlier before the sun reached noon, but it was already too miserable. Hot, scorching. If I could type, painfully painful. Instead, we were inside eating a cold dinner much too early. So that gets our first idea. I've looked at the concept. I've thought about who the author may be, what they may want us to experience, and then I've written something else entirely. And that's what I want you to be thinking about. When you're looking at that thing you love, what do you love about it? How can you make others, in this case we're talking about a wider audience than the original, feel that love? So this to me didn't always make a lot of sense, and now it makes a lot of sense. There are several scenes, very pivotal moments in this entire novel that are going to be based on this weather. The weather is going to impact right now what Jane can do. It's going to impact the death of her friend. It's going to impact her running into Rochester for the first time. It's going to impact, it's just going to keep going. The weather is going to be important. And so I want people to know that and feel that. So I'm going with heat. I'm going for the opposite, that, it's miserable. You need to be inside. You need to be in the shade, and that you can't just be out and about whenever you feel like it. So that's what I want you to think about. Anything you want to write about, so any story you enjoy, grab a piece of it and then share. It could be something very modern. It could be something brand new. You can also think about it in terms of what if you were turning it into a screenplay? So what would this opening look like in a screenplay? What could that be like? So look for those kinds of things, like what inspires you. So it inspires me to think about this weather and how I can shift that understanding. And sort of how this world is working for Jane, and then I want to take that and turn it into something else for my version. But you could be thinking about it for a screenplay or for being put up on stage. You could be thinking about how you just want it to open differently. I noticed some great comments throughout previous rewrites about maybe bringing the backstory forward and all kinds of different ideas. And so I want you to play and have fun. So anything is possible.